you have joined from Wimbledon in England. Yeah. Before I proceed with our program, I request all of you to please mute your microphones. Please mute your microphones. Please mute your microphones, everyone. Otherwise, we're going to have feedback or disturbances as the program proceeds. Hi, Robin. Do mute your microphones. I hope everybody's got that. And for those who are in the program, those who are scheduled to speak, kindly ensure that you are on the speaker view mode so that when you speak, you come up full screen. That's called the speaker view mode. Just to, for all the others, for our general audience who have joined us, please put your device on mute. And for those who are involved in the program today, please put your device on speaker view mode. Right. So a very good morning once again. And we are, of course, living through a time that appears at once very unreal and very hyper real, if you like. The pandemic is so in your face that we don't need to discuss it or discuss what it's all about. It's altered our lifestyle in many ways, our daily behavioral pattern in many ways, self-isolation, quarantine, what you call physical distancing, lockdown are the order of the day. And we, apart from masks and hand wash, of course, which are recommended as often as you can. And this new style or this new way of life seems to be here for a bit. It's not going away in a hurry. And so on an occasion like this, I repeat, please put your microphones on mute. There's some disturbance coming because somebody's microphone is not on mute. Alternatively, what I can do is we can put all microphones on mute. Then those who are in the program must remember to unmute their microphones when they join us. Is that okay? Shall we adopt that method?
That's fine, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm requesting Srinivas.
So
you have to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I've just unmuted my mic. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So as I was saying, we are going through very, very strange times, and so it's very heartening. It's a rare occasion actually to be in a community like this, even if it's online, and there's a sense of warmth, there's a sense of some kinetic energy taking place here. So very warm welcome. Just for the information of everyone concerned, the audience comprises the current batch of the ACJ, students of the ACJ who have joined for the class of 2021. We have students from the first batch of the ACJ, that is the 2001 batch, 20 years back. And there's a good reason why that batch has been particularly invited for this program, because one of the journalism awards being announced and presented today is in memory of one of our students in that first batch who unfortunately passed away some months back. We then have faculty, of course, of the ACJ, the core faculty and the adjunct faculty. We also have some select invitees. We have some of our trustees. Mr. Ram is there. I think Chandrasekhar will be there. Mr. Murali may be joining us a bit. Radhika Menon must be there. And we have, of course, the other staff of ACJ, the technical staff, the support staff, and some of our well-wishers whom we have invited to join us on this program. It's my particular pleasure to extend a special word of welcome to our chief guest for this event, for this commencement event, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who, of course, all of you know, as you know, is the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. She has been in the limelight, accompanying the limelight that the coronavirus gets these days, and made very, very important contributions to our understanding of where we are at in terms of our battle with or tackling this virus. So very, very warm welcome, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, on behalf of all of us at the ACJ And it's very kind of you to agree to Mr. Ram's request on our behalf to do the honors and to give us the commencement talk today. I'd also like to welcome each and every one of you, all those I mentioned just now, and I hope you'll stay with us through this program, which promises to be, I'm sure, as illuminating as it's engaging. Before I pass on to the baton on to Ram to say a few words, I'd just like to, by way of extended welcome, say we are already aware of, we're experiencing a kind of, we're aware of the idea of disruption in the digital media. That's not a new idea. We knew it before COVID-19 came along. But with COVID-19, we have had another disruption in terms of a natural disruption, a health disruption, if you like. And therefore, there's a double whammy of a disruption that we are facing today, that we are tackling today, that we are coping with or trying to cope with today. Yet, what is significant is that through this all, the media, the news media, much like, of course, the other frontline workers, I wouldn't call the news media frontline, on the front line of the battle against COVID. The health workers are, the doctors are, the other health workers are. But media has been right behind them, has been tailing what's been happening there. So there's no disruption in terms of the functioning of the media. Although organizationally, we may not be going, media practitioners may not be going to their offices, they may be working from their homes. The idea of the dispersed newsroom may be, in vogue now. The fact of the matter is that the media hasn't been able to take a break. If anything, the media has become that much more important because the role of communicating what's happening in terms of this crucial fight with this pandemic, with the policy measures that are initiated by governments across the world, by what's happening on the ground, keeping a track on it, on tab on what's happening, tracking the disease, and so on. The media has played a very crucial role, both the formal mainstream media as well as, of course, independent media. Some sections of the social media have played a very important role in all of this. I just want to mention at this point that there have been, suggestions, veiled kind of recommendations, if you like, that the media, the role of the media in a juncture like this, in a natural calamity situation like this, is a secondary one. It should take a back seat. It should actually just tail what the government is doing. Its role is to publicize and propagate the measures that are being taken by the government of the day, by the authorities. Of course, that's an important function, communicating what's happening and being that is of interest to the people. But I think the media, keeping the larger public interest of paramount importance, also has a role to critique what's happening, also has a role to look, shall we say, critically at all that is happening, has a role to inform, has a role to criticize, has a role to filter, has a role to call out, shall we say, policy deficiencies, maybe corrupt practices, if any, and to point out shortcomings, to see whether the benefits that are being passed on to the people are actually reaching the people, to see whether there are sections of the population that are being ignored. And in all of this, particularly, for instance, in the context of India, the big migration that took place from people who are working in different parts of the state, going back to their home, trekking hundreds and thousands of kilometers, in some cases over several days or weeks to get back home. That would have been a largely untold story, but for the initiative and enterprise of the media, because there was a clear, shall we say, tendency on the part of the powers that be to try and sweep that under the carpet, or not to give that as much importance as it ought to have been given. So the media, I think we want to get rid of the alibi that the media's role is only to tail and project and propagate what official India is doing in terms of countering or combating the pandemic. And the media, I'm sure, will continue to play that role actively, conscientiously, responsibly, and accountably in the days and weeks and months ahead. There are two parts to our program this morning. The first is, of course, the keynote address, what we call the address that our chief guest, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, will deliver, the commencement lecture. This is the Lawrence Dana Pinkham Memorial Address, and Our Dean, Dr. Nalini Rajan, will in a while be telling us both about the person in whose memory this lecture is held and about the person who's delivering the lecture. There'll be a fuller introduction to both of them. And then the other part of the program is the announcement and presentation of 2 journalism awards. The ACJ has for several years now been giving an award for best work, investigative work in journalism. And that award normally is given on Convocation Day. This year, because Convocation couldn't take place, which normally is held on World Press Freedom Day, that's May the 3rd, we are combining it in this function. And there's an additional new award this year in memory of our former student in the first batch of the ACJ, as I mentioned, the batch of 2001, KP Narayanan. And this award has actually been instituted by the alumni, in fact, his batchmates and others who have contributed to that award. So those award presentations, announcements and presentations and will be made by the jury. The chairperson of the jury is here. I'd like to extend a special word of welcome to the chairperson of the Journalism Awards jury, Senthil Chengalvarayan, and the other 2 jury members, Vidya Subramaniam and Joe Starakan. That's the 3-member final jury which went into the awards and decided who the winners are. So that's the way the program looks. And we are going to kick this off now with the first item on the program, which is a quick introduction, a very, very fleeting and quick introduction to ACJ, a montage that's going to be played. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm now going to request our trustee, Mr. N. Ram, to say a few words by way of introductory remarks, and then we'll move on to the main lecture of the morning. Mr. Ram?
I think this is a very important occasion for the Asian College of Journalism, and also I think for all the young people who have chosen at this difficult time to put their trust in our institution. We are particularly heartened by the fact that despite the challenges, so many young women and men have decided to go for journalism and come to what we at least regard as India's and South Asia's premier postgraduate school of journalism. And we are privileged to have Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. I won't introduce her because that's the dean who's going to do it. But I've known her for many years. And let me just briefly mention that apart from the extremely important work she's doing as chief scientist of the World Health Organization, what is relevant, particularly relevant in this context, is her gift of communication. I've experienced it myself, being in a conversation, the first one in the Kerala dialogue, the clarity with which she explains difficult subjects that require nuanced presentation, the accessibility that she provides, and the readiness to respond to various requests for demands made on her time. I think this is commendable, and we are indeed fortunate that Dr. Swaminathan is here today to deliver this lecture on where we are, what we know about the virus and the pandemic, and also the role of the media. which is the topic we suggested, and she readily agreed to that. Where we are at this juncture, more than 6 months into the coronavirus pandemic, has been called by the head of the Reuters Institute for Journalism Studies, the moment of truth for the news business and media owners. We don't want hype on this. We've heard many characterizations of the moment of truth, the crisis, the moment of transformation, and so on. But it is possible that this could be truly one of those moments of truth. The mass media, its business model, as well as its most valuable product, journalism, have taken a big hit globally and, of course, in India. Advertising virtually collapsed initially during the pandemic, and the situation has been improving, but far too slowly. It's been creeping up, ad revenues. There's been some improvement, but recovery is still a long way off. So far as the business model is concerned, so far as media revenues are concerned, revenues needed to produce journalism. And nobody knows what will happen in future. Journalism has been sustained quite strongly, has shown, I think, an impressive resilience and even some creativity. Also in India, the trends of ad and revenue decline for the media industry preceded the pandemic. This is an important point to remember. These trends were already at work. Ad revenue was under pressure for the print media and also for the news, television, and so on. With all that's happened, we don't have time to go into that. But this has made the situation, this has transformed it into a real crisis. And it has certainly, on the positive side, accelerated the process of digital change or transformation of the news media. If you go to the WAN-IFRA site, or the site of the Reuters Institute for Journalism Studies, you will see that some media organizations have done much better than others because they are well prepared. And also they showed a certain resilience. For example, the Financial Times and Scandinavian papers, a group called Nine in Australia, and also Globe and Mail in Canada and so on, also smaller publications. And in India also, I hope, we don't know enough about it, but I hope that some of these positive experiences will come to the fore. And ACJ has, in its 2 decades of functioning, seen many changes, many transformations. And I think Sashi, our chair, will agree that the institution, its faculty, and other staff have shown an impressive resilience and also a capacity to adjust to the changes. Perhaps not enough. It's never enough, but quite impressive. And I was very impressed by what our faculty and particularly the technical team, the lab there, has been able to do, for example, to provide remote access to editing, quite advanced editing facilities, which I think the students are going to check it out and enjoy this benefit. So I think we have the right place to come. And usually Lawrence, he was my professor at Columbia, Lawrence Dana Pinkham, Professor Pinkham. And he came here to help us set up the ACJ to get it going in the early years. Usually it's a convocation. The convocation lecture is named after this, but I think it's extremely appropriate that this commencement lecture, what we call commencement lecture, the lecture that starts it off, is going to be delivered by a very distinguished expert in the field, who's also an important international official in the World Health Organization. So I'm very pleased that we have been able to arrange this, and so many students and others have joined this event. Thank you, Sashi.
Thank you, Ram. Just as you said, we have a very distinguished speaker today to deliver the Lawrence Dana Pinkham lecture this year. Just a few words about Professor Pinkham. Lawrence Dana Pinkham, and he's someone we remember with a great deal of respect and affection at the Asian College of Journalism. Professor Pinkham was a professor of journalism at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and also at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He was dean at the Asian College of Journalism between 2001 and 2003. He is a graduate of the University of Maine and the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Professor Pinkham worked as a reporter for the Providence Journal, the Wall Street Journal, and United Press before joining the Columbia Journalism faculty in 1956. He remained at Columbia for 16 years, teaching print and broadcast journalism and creating new programs that aimed at updating the school's traditional curriculum. But Professor Pinkham left Columbia for UMass in 1972 and served as chair of the institution's new journalism program from 1976 to 1981. And during his time on the Massachusetts faculty, Professor Pinkham divided his time between Amherst and China. In 2001, Professor Pinkham accepted an invitation to serve as distinguished visiting professor and dean of the newly founded Asian College of Journalism in Chennai. His wife, Joan Pinkham, who accompanied him, taught supplementary English at the ACJ. Professor Pinkham died on February 28, 2010, following a heart attack, and he was 83. But I just want to very briefly read to you a wonderful excerpt from the New York Times. And this was the March 10th, 2010 obituary on Professor Pinkham. Many of Pinkham's former students remember him affectionately as a person of warmth and humor, an exciting and inspiring teacher, and a man whose progressive politics and commitment to social justice informed both his life and his teaching. So we remember Professor Pinkham, as I said earlier, and now this year's Lawrence Dana Pinkham Memorial Lecture, as I said earlier, will be delivered by Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who's the chief scientist at the World Health Organization. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan was also most recently WHO's Deputy Director General for Programs. A pediatrician from India and a globally recognized researcher on tuberculosis and HIV, she brings with her 30 years of experience in clinical care and research and has worked throughout her career to translate research into impactful programs. Dr. Swaminathan was Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research and Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research from 2015 to 2017. In that position, she focused on bringing science and evidence into health policy making, building research capacity in Indian medical schools, and forging South-South partnerships in health sciences. From 2009 to 2011, Dr. Swaminathan also served as coordinator of the UNICEF, UNDP, World Bank, WHO Special Program for Research and Training in Tropical Diseases in Geneva. She received her academic training in India, the United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland, apart from the United States of America, and she has published more than 350 peer-reviewed publications and book chapters. She is an elected foreign fellow of the US National Academy of Medicine and a fellow of all 3 science academies in India. She has previously been on several WHO and global advisory bodies and committees, including the WHO expert panel to review global strategy and plan of action on public health, innovation, and intellectual property, the Strategic and Technical Advisory Group of the Global TB Department at WHO. And most recently, she was co-chair of the Lancet Commission on Tuberculosis. So thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan, for agreeing to speak to us, and we look forward to listening to you.
Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, please go ahead.
Good morning, colleagues. I hope you can see me and hear me all right. Mr. Sashi Kumar, Mr. Ram, Ms. Nalini, the faculty of the Asian College of Journalism, and most importantly, the class, the incoming class of 2020-21, who is at the center of today's program. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Ram and Mr. Sashi Kumar for having given me this invitation, and looking back at the other eminent people who have delivered this lecture. I consider it a great honor and a privilege. And having read about Professor Pinkham a little bit, I think the values that he stood for and the importance that he placed to honesty in reporting, honesty in everything that one does in life, and standing up for one's beliefs and standing up for the right causes, I think is very, very inspiring. And I hope that all of us can, be able to stick with those principles in our life. I think it's, as both Sashi and Ram said, journalism is at a crossroads right now. There's quite a test in terms of many of the media outlets, not being able to continue with their regular activities. I know a lot of reporters have lost jobs, probably. The print media has particularly suffered. But on the other hand, the online and digital content has gone up tremendously, many fold. And I would like to say something a little later on about my own experience with journalists over the last 6 months. And it's been, on the whole, extremely positive. Particularly the serious science journalists who've been covering this pandemic. I've been tremendously impressed with the breadth and depth of knowledge these journalists have, with the amount of homework that they do really to understand the issues, and the kind of questions that some of them have asked me. Sometimes I'm struggling for answers. I have to actually go back and look up information or read or talk to someone else. So it has really given me a lot of respect for journalists who've been trying to cover this pandemic from all over the world. And the kind of stories that have been coming out, I think, have been tremendous and, have played a huge role, I think, in shaping public opinion and in shaping also people's behavior. And that's something I want to come back to, because behavior, individual behavior, and of course, the behavior of communities as well as of governments is what is going to make a big difference in the way in this pandemic unfolds. But perhaps I can start off by giving a little bit of the timelines over the last 6 months, the history. I mean, it seems such a long time now, but it's only been 6 months. Most people were on their Christmas, New Year break at the time that this outbreak of atypical pneumonias was happening in Wuhan. And on the 31st of December, our office in China actually alerted the headquarters about reports in the Chinese media about these atypical pneumonia cases. And the Chinese government confirmed that right away. And so on the 1st of January, actually, we activated what's called the Emergency Operations Center. The WHO is actually an organization that was set up by and serves the 194 member states. So the WHO is not an independent body that does its own thing, but we consider ourselves a secretariat which serves the needs and the wishes and the demands of the 194 member states, which come together every year at the World Health Assembly, but they also elect a smaller number of about 25 to 30 countries that serve as the executive board. And the executive board and the World Health Assembly are the governance mechanisms. Everything that WHO does has to go through and be approved by these bodies. And they are the ones who make the rules and who set the standards and the boundaries about how WHO can operate. Now, of course, the main function of WHO when it was set up in 1948 was to be the global health agency. Now, of course, things have changed a lot in 72 years. At that time, probably it was the only global health agency. Now we have many more. But it still retains a very unique position because it is the only normative standard setting health agency globally. And that function is something that has been recognized by everyone as one of the critical functions of WHO. It's not just in the medical or clinical area, but the public health space, but also setting standards for things which are linked to health, the determinants of health, like air quality standards, for example, water quality standards, road safety, nutrition, all the environmental, social, economic determinants of health, and tobacco is a big one as well. Now, in all its years, the WHO has only been able to come up, or the member states have only been able to come together to come up with 2 binding regulations. The first one is the International Health Regulations, which were last updated in 2005, which is very relevant for this pandemic. And the other one is a Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. These are the 2 which have some legally binding clauses and which countries actually do have to adhere to and do have to report on. And there's a mechanism, again, agreed between all the member states on how they do that. Now, the International Health Regulations actually is the one that deals with how countries will prevent, detect, respond to outbreaks and emergencies, how they report data to WHO, and how this data is then used, disseminated, made publicly available, and then the response based on that. So this is what gets activated as soon as there is an outbreak reported by any country anywhere. It doesn't matter if it is plague or if it is polio or if it is. There are a number of diseases that are considered reportable diseases within the International Health Regulations. So if any of those diseases are observed in a country, they are supposed to report it. And you have national focal points. So the national focal points, they all form a network. And they were brought together on the 4th of January to be informed about this outbreak of viral pneumonia. And what really happened was things moved quite fast. And on the 11th of January, we had the genetic sequence of this virus, of the first 6 virus isolates from China. I think they were all from Wuhan at that point, which were very quickly deposited in a public database by the Chinese authorities. So we had, on the 12th of January, the world knew that this was a new coronavirus, and we had the whole genetic sequence. Why is that important? Because if you know that, that's the only way that you then move to the response, that is diagnostics. Because without diagnostics, you cannot obviously detect and diagnose any disease. And so based on the sequence data, scientists around the world were quickly, within 24 to 48 hours, developing the diagnostic test that would be needed to detect this. And that is how we were able to prepare a large number of countries by making those SOPs available, by shipping the reagents to countries which did not have them, and by equipping labs, making sure that the labs around the world which deal with these kind of viral diagnostics, mostly the influenza lab. We have a big influenza lab network globally, which has a lot of capacity to look at viral infections, and national labs and so on. So within 48 hours, we had the diagnostics in place, which was, I think, a huge plus, which has never happened before, I think, in any other outbreak, epidemic. And the other thing that happened because of this was that scientists also started working on vaccines very early on. So if you look at the speed with which the vaccines have been developed. It was only possible because the sequence data was available and that it could be immediately used, because a lot of the viral vaccines now are platform based, and all you need is to plug in the specific sequence of a new pathogen. And that is why we see today over 200 vaccine candidates in development and over 27 of them now in clinical trials. I mean, it's an unprecedented speed at which things have happened this time around. And it's been amazing to be in the center of it and to watch the science unfold. Now, one of the important issues and questions was obviously about whether this virus was likely to become a pandemic. Was it likely to spread around the world? And what sort of impact would it have? Now, at the beginning, it's really very hard to predict what's going to happen. We've had experiences with coronaviruses in the past, of course. This is not the first coronavirus. So there are previously 6 known coronaviruses. 4 of them cause a common cold that all of us have suffered from and are not very serious. But 2 of them, the SARS-CoV-1, which caused the SARS outbreak in 2003-4, and the MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, which was first detected 2011-12, obviously in the Middle East, but has caused outbreaks around the world. Now, the SARS-1 actually was controlled within 8 months, and it killed about 800 people at that time around the world. Of course, it caused a huge scare, particularly for global travel and so on. It did go to many countries out of China, starting from China, Hong Kong, and went all the way to Canada and so on. But it hasn't come back. It was, and it's important because the properties of the virus are different, even though this one is a close cousin of the SARS-1. The MERS, on the other hand, is a virus that is in the animal that carries the virus is a camel. And the camels can carry the virus without being sick, and they then pass it on to human beings. And so from time to time, you get outbreaks. And it also causes human to human if you're in very close contact with the patient. So we knew a little bit about previous coronaviruses to make some educated guesses about how this would behave. But the properties of this virus turned out to be quite different in terms of the transmissibility, the ease with which it spreads from person to person, and the speed at which it's been able to move around the world. Now, we warned of human-to-human transmission around the middle of January, and it was confirmed a little later by reports coming out of China. We also convened the International Health Regulations has an emergency committee that discusses any of these kinds of global emergencies. And they got together on the 22nd of January and came back with a decision that it wasn't yet a public health emergency of international concern. Again, WHO, the way it operates is it relies on expert advisory groups from around the world to advise whether it's norms and standards and guidelines, or whether it's things like this, where you have to take decisions. They're all informed by top-level scientific experts that form these committees. So the emergency committee at that time said it wasn't yet a public health emergency of international concern, but the Director General reconvened them a week later on the 30th of January. At that time, there were 82 cases outside China. The first case had just been detected in Kerala on that day, and there had been no deaths outside of China. At that time, the emergency committee said, yes, this is can constitute a public health emergency of international concern, which is the highest level of alert that the WHO can actually give to the world. It basically tells the world, get ready. This could be a very, very serious thing. It's not declared, very easily. The public health emergency of international concern. The last one, of course, was Ebola in the DRC, and previously it was a Zika outbreak in 2016. Once that happened, countries are expected to really up their preparation for being able to deal with this infection as and when it entered. Through February, we continued to work. In fact, we brought together global scientists for a forum, a research forum in mid-February, because we realized that the solution or the way out of this pandemic is going to be through science, and that we needed to really convene the scientists to get their views and opinions. And I think this has again been a change from previous, and we've learned, of course, every time you learn and you improve. And after 2014-15 Ebola in West Africa, WHO was criticized quite a lot. And so there was a big overhaul of the emergency program undertaken at that time. And one of the things that emerged from it was the need to be prepared not only for a public health response on the ground in terms of surveillance and being able to put people on the ground and do all the steps that are needed, but also in terms of the research and development that would be needed for a new disease, or for a disease which exists, but for which the world has neglected, the development of tools. And we know this is true. We have been living with diseases like tuberculosis and malaria for millennia. We've also been living with a lot of other diseases which are called neglected diseases, neglected tropical diseases, which affect mostly people in the poorer parts of the world. And we have other diseases which are very serious, but which are rare. Things like Nipah, like Ebola, like other hemorrhagic fevers that occur from time to time that kill people, but do not constitute enough of a, let's say, numbers-wise, enough of a threat to the world for the world to invest in research and development. So the WHO actually highlighted this through what we call the R&D blueprint, where we listed many of these infections, mostly viral infections, by the way, and mostly infections that come from animals, so zoonotic infections, saying that anytime we could always have a global outbreak with any of these diseases for which the tools don't exist. And on that list was something called pathogen X, which could cause disease X. And what that really meant, and what the experts who developed that list meant, was that in the future, there is going to be an outbreak with an unknown pathogen for which we will not know anything when it strikes us. What can we do to prepare ourselves in terms of being ready with the kind of labs that you might need to work on this, and training scientists and having the capacity to quickly put together diagnostics? And then how do you develop treatments and vaccines for an infection? So luckily that groundwork had been done, that platform existed. And so we activated this blueprint and we brought together 400 scientists in middle of February. At that time, travel was still possible. So people actually physically came to Geneva. Of course, many people connected virtually as well. And we shared experiences. The Chinese scientists that could not travel, they connected virtually. At that time, they were the ones who were seeing firsthand this disease. Rest of the world hadn't seen much of it. And so they described both the clinical as well as the epidemiological features. We learned a lot from them in the early days. And then we went on to develop a research roadmap, which laid out what scientists need to work on over the coming months, starting from epidemiology and transmission and the animal source of the virus, going all the way through clinical management, infection prevention and control, diagnostics, vaccines, therapeutics, but also very importantly, social science and ethics were two working groups that were set up, because right from the beginning, we understood that ethics in everything that we do is going to be important. And we needed bioethicists from around the world to be watching and advising on this, and also social and behavioral scientists, because no public health campaign works actually without understanding how public responds to things that are happening around them and how behavior change can be brought about. And in fact, very recently, we've set up a behavioral insights unit based on some of the work that's been done by behavioral economists and things like the nudge factor and so on. So these are some of the newer things that we're putting in place, which we had started thinking about before this pandemic, but we had to accelerate the speed at which we were doing this. And as a head of the science division, I'm in charge of making many of these changes in the way in which we operate, in the way in which we do our norms and standards and guidelines, and in the way in which we communicate. So starting from there, of course, now we've learned more about the virus, how it transmits particularly has been of importance, but it's a very different kind of virus. And so I don't know if how many of you actually remember a very enigmatic statement that was made by Donald Rumsfeld, who was a Secretary of Defense under President George Bush, who said that there are known knowns, there are things that we know, there are known unknowns. Those are the things that we know we don't yet know, but there are also unknown unknowns. And I think this statement well describes the reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly the role that the media has had to play in this outbreak. There's a lot that we still don't know. Huh? There is, of course, so much that we've learned, but it's what we don't know that still worries us. And that is why we continue to convene scientists and make clear the knowledge gaps that still exist. So information and misinformation spread as fast as the virus did. This was one of the early challenges that we had. There were rumors and conspiracy theories. The virus also became politicized. There was mistrust among countries. There was a lot of anti-intellectualism, anti-science views, distrust of expertise. All of these was increasing the uncertainty. And this is really the time when you actually need science journalists more than ever. There was a tsunami actually of information and something that we called the infodemic. This was a term that was coined quite early on in WHO to go alongside the epidemic. We said there's also an infodemic. There's a huge amount of information going out there, a significant amount of which is actually misinformation, either willful, planting rumors and lies and so on, or people just, not applying their mind and just putting out things over there. The other trend which happened a lot in the field of scientific publishing was that the good thing was that most of the journals actually removed their paywalls for anything related to COVID-19. So they made the everything accessible, freely accessible, even those journals which normally have a very high subscription fee. And this was done very early on, and it was something that we had earlier discussed with journal editors, but we were very appreciative of that. The other thing that happened, of course, was that there are these preprint archives. You have the Med Archive and the Bio Archive. These preprint archives started a few years ago by the scientific community, which wanted to share information ahead of publishing. So if you've written a paper and you put it out into this preprint archive, then what happens is that you get a peer review from scientists around the world, which is an informal peer review, and sometimes get very good feedback. And it's a way of also making the scientist or the author themselves think about their paper or improve it before they submit it for a formal peer review to a journal. So the amount of preprints just increased tremendously. I think I've got some numbers. But what that did was that the media journalists also had access to preprints. Okay, preprints are normally meant to be looked at by the scientific community, and particularly those who are already experts in that field, because they can judge whether or not a paper has some huge errors in it, and whether you can actually trust the methodology if things are looking like they've been done well, documented well, and then you go on to reading the results. But first you look at methodology always. So that's what a scientist does when they read a scientific paper. But when the lay public and the media is also looking at this, they're not necessarily applying that same lens. And so what was happening is a lot of things which had just been put into a archive as a preprint were then picked up and became headlines, around the world. And there was no distinction between things which are still not vetted and considered to be scientific facts and things which are unverified observations that have been just put up by someone. And you have, it's a difficult task to actually distinguish between high quality and poor quality in the preprint literature. So we again started quite early on looking at this and saying, okay, what can WHO do to provide the right information to people? And so we were screening both the published literature and preprints every day and making it available to people and also putting out some highlights from that. But it's a very difficult task for a small team of people who have many other things also that they have to do. So that is where, again, I think journalists also need probably that insight and a scientific training, I suppose, helps if you're a science journalist in being able to distinguish the good quality and the bad quality. You also need, when you're reporting on a pandemic, it requires both nuance and context. And again, in the beginning, there was very little context because what we had seen was the China experience of the complete lockdown and the way in which, of course, they handled it extremely effectively. And at that time, I think many people believed that this kind of response would not be possible in other countries. But then we went on to see many other countries actually also implementing lockdowns in an effort to control the spread of this infection, because basically this virus spreads through person-to-person contact. It's a respiratory virus. It comes out when you're coughing, singing, talking loudly, breathing even. And if you're in close contact with somebody who's got the virus, then it can, you have to be in prolonged close contact with that person. You can actually get infected. So one of the things about this virus which makes it very difficult, or a couple of things about it. One is that even people who don't have many symptoms or minimal symptoms or even no symptoms can spread the infection if they are carrying the virus. So what we call asymptomatic people. Then you have a group called pre-symptomatic. That is, I'm infected, I'm carrying the virus in my respiratory tract, but I don't have any symptoms today, but a couple of days from now, I might develop symptoms, but I'm actually infectious today. So today, I don't know I'm sick. I'm going around meeting people without taking much precautions, actually spreading the infection. So epidemiological studies have shown that the secondary infections occur in about 10 to 15% of household. So the most common is within the household is when people get infected. And that's why the Chinese very early on started moving family members out into separate quarantine facilities, because they found most of the transmission was occurring within households. And then it's so 10 to 15% and somewhere around 2 to 5% to non-household contacts, so more casual contacts. We've also seen what we call the super spreader events. Very early on, we saw some of these cruise ships where hundreds of people got infected, even though everybody was supposedly in their own chambers or isolated in their own rooms. But they were meeting. There were certain common meeting points, meeting for meals and things like that. We've seen this happening in choirs. We've seen it happening in pubs and restaurants, and also in places like factories and dormitories where people are staying close together. So we often talk of the 3 C's, the crowded places, the close contact, and the closed environments where you don't have good ventilation and where you are with a number of other people, one of whom may be infected. This is the kind of setting where the infection tends to spread. There's also been a lot of fear about aerosol transmission. Is this virus like measles or tuberculosis? Is it flying around in the air? Can you get infected? This could happen in certain situations, what is called opportunistic aerosolization. In general, as I said, the commonest mode is person to person. You're within a few feet of the other individual, within 3 feet. you're talking, you have prolonged contact, or you're together working, that's when the infections tend to happen. But very rarely, you could have situations where in a closed environment, poor ventilation, the virus could actually be in the environment circulating for a couple of hours before it settles to the ground. And that way others could be breathing it in. And that's how you've had outbreaks in some of these call centers and things like that. So this is important because understanding how, when, and where the virus spreads is obviously going to inform the effective public health action. And we know today that governments are struggling with containing this infection, particularly in countries and cities which are overcrowded, which have high population density, which have low resources, urban slums, poor access to healthcare, and so on. And they're also struggling with things like schools and colleges. How do you continue education in an environment where you know that this can spread, if you give it a chance. And young children, luckily in this outbreak, the virus has not, it can infect young children, but they don't get sick. It can, 10 to 19-year-olds, on the other hand, are more likely to spread it than children under 9 years of age. Sorry, there was a little bit of disturbance. So understanding, the biological factors of the host and the virus is very important. Also the immunology. That's the other big area that people are working on now, and that is, what is the immunity to this virus? We know for the common cold, for example, that we don't have long-lasting immunity. You can get repeatedly colds with the same or similar coronaviruses. With the SARS and the MERS, we know immunity lasts for a couple of years. For this virus, we still don't know because we've only had it for 6 months. And so unless we do those studies over a longer period of time, we won't know. But already there are reports, and again, the media has been reporting on how antibodies are disappearing very quickly. Does this mean that we will not have immunity to this virus? And that's causing a lot of panic among people. But the fact of the matter is that we have not understood fully immunity, because you have different kinds of immune cells in the body. Some of them are more long lasting. So even when antibodies reduce, you could still have those memory immune cells, which can actually get activated and produce a good immune response later on. And also the vaccine trials that are going on now will give us much more information about immunity, and also try and understand why some people have no symptoms at all. They test positive, but nothing happens, and others suffer such severe illness, severe morbidity, and end up in the hospital in intensive care unit. And then even after they get discharged, now there are descriptions coming of long-term neurological effects, long-term mental health issues, fatigue, long-term respiratory issues. People who've suffered have said they haven't felt back to normal even 3 months afterwards. They still have shortness of breath when they walk, long-term cardiovascular effects. So this is not a virus that only affects the respiratory system, it affects many organs. And those are things that we're still understanding. And what has changed very much for the positive is the fact that we understand how to treat this disease much better. A number of clinical trials actually were started. We run a registry of clinical trials where we get the registries from all the other countries, which are consolidated at the WHO. Something like more than 4,000 clinical trials that have been registered already for this virus, which has only been around 6 months. A lot of them initially, of course, were from China, both allopathic drugs and traditional medicines, using what we call repurposed drugs, where you have existing drugs used for other indications, like it could be for influenza or for some other virus like HIV, and then doctors test it in the lab. If it shows some signs of working against this virus, then you quickly put it into clinical trials and you can test it in humans. And this is quick because the drug already exists, it's safe, it's been licensed for use. It's a question of repurposing it. So the first set of trials were all repurposed drugs, including hydroxychloroquine, which is one of the things that has become so politicized unnecessarily. But many other drugs were tested. Many of them were not found to be very effective. And then doctors started describing the other changes, the blood clotting system, for example, and then something called the cytokine storm, which is the immune system overreacting and causing damage. And so it was recognized that you need to calm the immune system. So you actually need to give anti-inflammatory drugs like steroids, the dexamethasone. And at that time, WHO also thought of something very novel, and that was a solidarity trial. And we said, why don't we launch something that the whole world can participate in, which will help us to generate evidence on some of these drugs? Many of them are being unprovenly propagated, including by politicians. And so we need to make sure that we generate evidence. And the other thing that I mentioned is 4,000 clinical trials, mushrooming of trials, many of them very small, unable to answer the question. So a coordinated research effort is really important in a pandemic, because otherwise you have this fragmented approach, which often is using a lot of resources, but not providing the answers that we want. So we launched the Solidarity series of trials, including some Solidarity epidemiological studies. So that means you have a common protocol. Countries agree to participate. Most countries fund their own studies. And you are generating data into a common pool. So today the Solidarity trial has 25 countries participating. We have over 6,500 patients recruited. So it's one of the largest trials in the world. And we are able to answer one question and go on to the next, what's called an adaptive trial design. This is something we want to now promote for vaccines as well, because again, there are a large number of vaccine candidates in development. Some of them, the big companies, the multinationals, have the resources, the wherewithal, and the expertise to run their own trials. There are many other smaller companies which are developing vaccines, which might not get the same opportunities. And so we want to provide a platform for vaccines also to be tested. And I'm so happy to see so many vaccine candidates being developed in India. There are a large number in China as well. And almost every country now has vaccine development efforts on. India, of course, will play a major role in manufacturing and scaling of the vaccines, quite apart from the R&D that is happening. So that's again a model of global collaboration in order to answer key questions, which will enable faster development of products, whether they're therapeutics or vaccines. But also I want to add to that is the importance of equitable access, which in the past, we've had bad experiences in previous epidemics, including the H1N1 pandemic, where vaccines were cornered by high-income countries. And there was very little left for the low-income countries. And it's only when the pandemic turned out not to be so serious that those countries which had actually stockpiled vaccines then gave up some of their stocks to distribute to the low-income countries. Now, that would be a terrible thing if it happened this time around. And the term vaccine nationalism has been used to describe the fact that many countries are only thinking about their own populations. But the argument that we're making is that this is a virus which is everywhere in the world. And it would be impossible for the world to go back to normal as we know it, and for the economy to recover if only pockets of people are protected while the rest of the world is still where the virus continues to rip through populations and destroy economies. You cannot have a global economy that works like that. And so it's in everybody's self-interest to have a more multilateral or a global approach to vaccine deployment and distribution rather than a more nationalistic approach. But it's difficult issue, because most political leaders would first think about protecting their own people. And it is true that they have a responsibility for their own citizens. But at the same time, in this particular case, it is not enough to protect only your own citizens. It is important to ensure that people around the world have access in an equitable way. So what we are proposing is, if we have a limited supply of vaccines at the beginning of 2021, let's say a few 100 million doses, how do we distribute that? Who should get it first? Is it all the frontline workers, the health workers, the social care workers, the police, the others who are really at high risk of getting infection? Should they not be prioritized before otherwise healthy adult populations start getting it? Because there are two options. One, a few countries vaccinate their entire population. Others are waiting for a long time. And you know that today we have 10% of all infections have occurred in healthcare workers. And we've all seen the stories of the healthcare workers around the world who died tragically. So it would be unfair not to protect them before everyone else, gets a chance at the vaccine. So this is an ongoing dialogue that's happening globally. It's a very difficult discussion. Of course, ethically, one would say, and morally, what is the right thing to do? But getting consensus on that is a challenge. Now, we have the ACT Accelerator. So again, we try to address this by bringing together global agencies under the Access to COVID Technologies Accelerator. It has pillars of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. And we also launched something called the COVID Technologies Access Pool, which is to encourage people, whether they are scientists or countries or companies, to pool their technologies, pool their IP in this for the sake of the pandemic, so that people again have access. And this doesn't just mean patents of drugs or of vaccines, but it's really the transference of technology that is important here, whether it's how to make a low-cost ventilator or an oxygen supply equipment or a diagnostic kit. So we have to wait and see. I think this will all play out over the next few months. And we hope that political leaders would all do the right thing. I want to come a little bit to the media and what I have observed. As I mentioned, the infodemic, was coined. This word was coined to describe too much information, including an abundance of false or misleading information. This happened on the 2nd of February, so 3 days after the Director General declared the public health emergency of international concern. He said, we are fighting two epidemics. One is the COVID epidemic, the other is information, the infodemic. In May 2020, COVID was the second most used word in all public English language social media posts, narrowly beaten by the word people. So it was people and then COVID were the two most commonly used words in social media. There are today more than 361 million videos uploaded on YouTube under COVID-19. 19,200 articles have been published in Google Scholar in the first 4 months of the year. 550 million tweets included the term coronavirus or COVID-19 or pandemic. Just in March alone, 550 million tweets. And all of these include the spread and propagation of misinformation, disinformation, and rumors, which ultimately, of course, leads to mistrust in governments and public health response. And it's propagated by fundamentally interconnected way of how information is disseminated and consumed through the web, the mass, and social media, and other information channels. So the governments actually are faced, and WHO was also faced with having to balance the pandemic response and an infodemic response by providing helpful information to the population and at the same time countering the misinformation and rumors. A recent analysis by the Reuters Institute of English language misinformation found that 39% of the misinformation assessed was false claims about the actions or policies of public authorities, including government and international bodies like WHO. And the public is actually now questioning the accuracy and relevance of information from traditional sources. So what do we need to do to manage an infodemic? It's obviously not enough to just address misinformation. We also have to build trust so that the good information or the correct information is picked up and used. Because we've seen that the infodemic is also stoking xenophobia and hate and exclusion. And it can actually be quite a far-reaching threat to health and human rights. So communicating regularly with the public is very important. And that's something we also recognize. The Director General, right from day one, started having these press briefings on a daily basis. And this continued right up to last month, actually, when we moved to weekly twice press conferences. So we also need to build collaboration with journalists and local fact checkers, because journalists are the people on the ground. And they actually, so this media interaction that we have on a daily or a twice weekly basis now is extremely important, because you have journalists logging in from all over the world, asking questions specifically about certain countries and so on, but also about the global response, and often providing some information that we then need to cross-check on. So building these partnerships, we have, for example, a regular session with the Science Journalists Federation of the world, where you have 300-400 science journalists actually logging on and asking us questions. And I've myself done many of these Q&A sessions, both with science journalists, regular journalists, and with Facebook Live, where we're talking to the general public and answering questions. So we have tried our best to be as accessible and responsive as possible, and build also relationships with different groups, like the social media groups. So we have been in touch with all the technology companies that run social media very early on, again, saying how do we counter misinformation, and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, all of them actually now have mechanisms to pick up and delete that, or if somebody is asking a query, to direct them to credible sources of information. So I think the combined voices of amplifiers in social media and technology, as well as from the academia and civil society, if you have them all singing from the same song sheet or harmonizing, then obviously it's much easier, but that is tough. The specific role of science journalists here has really been to explain the concepts in a simple way, complicated concepts, to simplify them for the public, because then you help people to understand their own risks and how their action can change outcomes. So it is only through amplification, through media, through journalists, that the messages that the science agencies are putting out can actually be communicated. And every time that you draw a line between science and rumor, you actually push people's behavior towards the healthy choice. So every fact that you check, every right question, every time a dry story is made interesting or a complex story seems simple, is adding to the volume of good information that we need to navigate this pandemic. Of course, we're all at risk also of moving from information overload to information fatigue. And people will already are and will get tired of hearing about COVID-19, and there may be a risk of letting our guard down. And so again, we need to continue to keep up the messaging on the important issues, but also to highlight issues that would not have been brought to the front if it were not for journalists. And I think that's, especially now when everybody's focused only on COVID-19, there is a huge risk that we neglect, or we do not see what is happening actually behind the scenes in terms of other aspects of life, both in health, so other diseases. Like I'm very concerned about tuberculosis, for example, and the fact that TB case notifications have dropped by more than 50% in many countries, actually, in the first 6 months of this pandemic, because people have not been able to go to the hospital, healthcare sites have been disrupted, clinics are not open, etc. Labs are already overwhelmed. But also what's happening to nutrition of young children, what's happening to violence against women and domestic abuse, what's happening because so many people have lost their livelihoods. So what's happening in terms of household food and nutrition security, but also the general mood of the people. And then finding solutions, obviously, once you understand the issues and what's going on, then one can think of what needs to be done to tackle it. But that kind of reporting is very important. As I mentioned before, I've been so impressed with the in-depth science journalism that has happened during this pandemic, but also the in-depth journalism focusing on some of these issues, for example, in rural India and in places which are not in the headlights, to bring those stories is extremely important. For that, of course, you need not only energy, but you need commitment. You need to take risks. You need to be out there. And a lot of young journalists in India today are doing that. And again, it's very, very impressive to see all of the online reporting that has been happening. And they're mostly young. And I see quite a large proportion of them also being women. So I think, good information is like a vaccine, actually. And before we have a real vaccine, we have to rely on our known and trusted public health measures. And when people are equipped with the right information, they will do the right thing. I think mask wearing is a good example of behavior change that I can see today has happened, at least in the urban areas. We don't know much yet about the rural areas, but even mask wearing, you can have a wrong way and a right way of wearing the mask. And if you're doing it the wrong way, it's not really going to be of great help. And we know that if over 80-90% of the population is wearing masks all the time when stepping out of the home, you can have a significant impact on the transmission. So this is something that everybody needs to do in order for it to have an impact. And so this is the kind of thing where I think the media plays a hugely important role. So I think those were some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. This class that's coming in obviously has 2 exciting years ahead, and then a world which will probably be very different. We don't know what the post-corona world, post-pandemic world is going to look like. We know many things will change for the better, I hope. Our environmental footprints, certainly we need to keep them low. This kind of Zoom meetings, I think, work well in many situations. And one doesn't need to fly halfway across the world in order to deliver a lecture. So those good learnings and good habits, I think we should keep. I also hope there'll be long-term improvements in sanitation, in hygiene, in personal hygiene, as well as public hygiene, and of course, in investments in health, universal health coverage, as well as preparedness for future pandemics and emergencies. And when one prepares for natural, it's not only infectious disease, but also other kinds of health emergencies which can happen and which one needs to be prepared for. That needs investment actually before. It's like repairing the roof. When the rain, when there's a downpour, that's not the right time to repair the roof. The roof has to be repaired before the rain comes, before the monsoon. And so it's we need to really invest in more in preparedness, even though the success of that preparedness is that you're protected from having these kind of pandemics. So it's never visible, and it's always the counterfactual is not easy to prove. So with that, I wish you very successful tenure and very happy tenure in the college, and then of course very successful careers after that. I'm also very happy that these awards are being given away today, and I look forward to meeting with the awardees just now. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sashi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan, for that excellent, very valuable, very enriching perspective on this COVID-19, this pandemic, the history, what the origin of it, and how it developed and where we are at now, and particularly towards the end, the very valuable and cues for journalism and what journalism should be doing in order to contribute, in order to make people aware of the multifaceted aspects of this very, very elusive pandemic, and the commonsensical things that all of us should do: wear masks, wash our hands. Thank you very much. I think it's been a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and all of us are the richer for it. We now move on to the second part of our program, which is the announcement of the ACJ Journalism Awards and the presentation of these awards. And for this, I'm going to hand over to the convener of the ACJ Journalism Awards, Nikhil Kanekal. Nikhil Kanekal has been associated with the awards. He's been coordinating this from the very day we instituted the first award, the ACJ Award for Investigative Journalism. And this year he's also taken on the second award, the Narayanan Award. Over to you, Nikhil. Take us through the award announcement and presentation. And Dr. Swaminathan will be presenting the awards to the winners once they are in a token manner, I suppose. She'll say whatever she likes, a symbolic gesture of presenting the award. Yeah. Nikhil, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you also to Dr. Samya Swaminathan for that deeply insightful lecture. I'm just going to begin by quickly sharing my screen and taking you through the award presentation. Yes, so at the outset, I'd just like to briefly introduce the awards and provide some context, and then take everyone here through the, I will introduce the jury and then take everyone through the awards process. So at the outset, I'd just like to say that we're very grateful to the Media Development Foundation and the Asian College of Journalism for having instituted these awards to recognize some of the best efforts that are being made in the field of journalism, particularly in an effort to promote public interest journalism. It's with that spirit and purpose that these awards were instituted, and the ACJ continues to recognize the best in the profession. This has also helped to build a very healthy bridge between a professional media school like the ACJ and a very vibrant profession like journalism in a country like India, where a lively and it's important to have a lively and vibrant media environment. So it's serving the profession very well, and where it makes me very proud personally to be associated with this effort. So without further ado, I'd just like to take you through the previous winners of this award. For the very first year, we had Nilita Bachani and the Caravan magazine that won this award in 2015. In 2016, we had the Indian Express journalists Shamlal Yadav and Jay Mazumdar, who won for their story on the Jandan bank accounts. In 2017, we had India Spend and Samar Harlankar, who won for his piece on citizenship in Assam. And in 2018, we had Nilina MS, who won for her expose of Colgate that was published also in the Caravan magazine. Nilina, incidentally, is an alumna of the Asian College of Journalism. So with that, I'll also like to briefly, quickly explain who's been associated with the award adjudication process. The awards have been very fortunate to have had an absolutely stellar galaxy of public intellectuals overseeing the process. So we've had 2 former High Court Chief Justices, 2 national newspaper editors, a national magazine editor, two professors of history, a professor of economics, a filmmaker, former governor and a diplomat, and of course, last but not the least, several journalists and journalism educators who've been a part of this process. So we're incredibly grateful to everyone who's been associated with the awards adjudication process in the past. Now, coming to this year's entries, we had an overwhelming response for the ACJ awards this year. We received 105 entries for the investigative journalism category, and we received 147 entries in the social impact journalism category, which is a new award, which we'll talk about a little more in depth as we go along. The entries came in 7 languages and from 60 news organizations or brands across India. And this left us with an absolutely mammoth task on the administration and the adjudication side. So the judging criteria for both awards included language, presentation, and structure. And on the investigative journalism side, we had reporting method and investigative method, as well as public interest. While on the social impact journalism side, we had reporting method and social impact. So that's a little bit about how we went about the, what kind of events we applied to these awards. The actual process involved a shortlist jury, which comprised of several members, 18 members of the ACJ faculty, to each of whom we are deeply grateful for having taken lots of time and effort to really comb through those 250 entries in both categories and come together to present the final jury with a succinct shortlist of 10 entries in each category. So that's a little bit about the process that went into the adjudication of these awards. And these entries finally rolled up to this final jury here, whom I'll introduce. The jury was chaired by Mr. Senthil Chengalvarayan, who is a former founding member and editor-in-chief of CNBC TV 18, formerly of the Network 18 group. We also had members, Ms. Vidya Subramaniam, who was former associate editor at The Hindu. And we had Mr. Jose Martin Tharakan, who's a former executive editor of the Hindustan Times. Jose Martin Tharakan, incidentally, was also from the first batch of the ACJ in 2001. So we're very fortunate to have this absolutely wonderful jury come together to apply the final lens when it came to these entries, and we're grateful that they're all with us on this program, and we're grateful to have them with us. Before I hand over to the jury for the actual announcements of the award, I will invite Jarshad NK, the Dean of the ACJ Bloomberg Program in Business and Financial Journalism, to please introduce and talk about KP Narayana Kumar and the KP Narayana Kumar Memorial Award for Social Impact Journalism. So Jarshad, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody who knows Narayan will know that's the best way to start a speech about him. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the presence of all my friends from the first batch of ACJ who have joined us here today. I know you guys wouldn't have missed it for the world. KP Narayana Kumar, KP or Narayanan to his friends, was the sort of guy who made you feel embarrassed if you didn't put in your best efforts while working on a story. While most of us took different approaches for the articles we did at ACJ for a lab newspaper, The Word, Narayan would almost always focus on the individual. That was not to say that his stories lacked range. He wrote on a wide variety of topics and tried to tell stories that weren't getting enough attention, particularly those of the disadvantaged. I remember talking to entrepreneurs as part of our reporting assignments while he would park himself in the subway near a college and interview the beggars there. Of course, being ultra competitive, we would sometimes make fun of his story ideas, but we knew deep down then, as we know now, that his focus was the right one. One of the funniest incidents at ACJ for me was when Adine, KTO, taught us how to crop pictures to various column sizes using butter paper, pencil, and scale. Cropping in the pre-digital journalism world did not mean cutting a picture, but was a means to indicate the desired size of the picture for printing. We had to use the pencil and scale to draw lines on the butter paper stuck on the picture to indicate the size we wanted. Narayan just couldn't get it and didn't know what the fuss was all about. He just went ahead and cut the picture with a pair of scissors to the single column size that we were asked to. Our dean didn't obviously like that, and it took a while for Narayan to realize his mistake, but that was him, uncomplicated. He would always cut through the clutter. While this may not have helped him much as a desker, it made for a remarkable reporter. Not for him were the various diagonals, lines, and ratios of cropping pictures on butter paper. If you wanted a single column picture, you would cut one that size. Narayan and I began our journalism careers at Times of India, Hyderabad, along with a few other friends from ACJ, including Jose, who's part of the awards jury here today. I didn't stay long there, but the few months I did showed me that Narayan didn't let cynicism that is rampant in the profession beat his enthusiasm for telling stories that mattered. He was determined to make an impact. He didn't believe in becoming a typical crime reporter who called up sources to write articles from his desk. He went out, met people, and was willing to work endlessly for the stories he believed in. He would also later hang out after shift was over and try to help us in whatever way he could. We worked together at Forbes India about a decade later again. That's when I realized that Narayan was also an incredibly patient man. One of his stories on some biofuel had been stuck with the desks for some reason, not because of his reporting or anything, for more than 6 months, and I was asked to clear it when I joined the magazine. By then, Narayan had written many stories that were not just discussed by journalists, but also by readers, particularly at Mint. Still, he answered all my questions patiently and was even willing to do further reporting if required. But more than all this, he was a very kind person, kind heart. Most of his friends have heard the story of how he caught someone trying to steal his purse, and he ended up giving the pickpocket a 500 rupee note after the guy told him a sob story. The only thing forceful about him was that the way he cleared his throat before he began talking. But even that he did only after he listened attentively to what you had to say. Perhaps this was the reason why he could write stories about those whose voices were rarely heard in the media. When Narayan passed away at the age of 39, the class of 2001 thought that the best way to celebrate his life would be by recognizing journalism that he would have appreciated himself. We then took the idea to the chairman, Shashi Kumar, sir, and then he immediately agreed to it. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank all my friends from the first batch and Narayan's friends, particularly even Nikhil, for working tirelessly to make this award a reality. The KP Narayan Kumar Memorial Award for Social Impact Journalism will honor exceptional original reporting on important subjects with the potential to have social impact, spur reform, and find solutions. The stories that qualify for the award would have identified a social problem and reported it in a way that points to possible solutions, giving voice to the voiceless and shining a light on underreported subjects lost in the drumbeat of breaking news. The award comprises a trophy, a citation, and a cash prize of rupees 1 lakh. The batch of 2001 will forever miss Narayan, but today is an occasion to celebrate him. Thank you all so much, and over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you so much, Jarshad, for that wonderful and heartfelt introduction to this very significant award. I would now like to invite the jury chairperson, Mr. Senthil Changalvarayan, to please take over the award ceremony and share your remarks and announce the names of the winners, please. So over to you, Senthil.
Thank you, Nikhil. And let me first of all begin by thanking Sashi, Nikhil, Jarshad for inviting us, the jury, to judge these awards. It was extremely enriching, extremely enlightening. I'd also like to thank Dr. Swaminathan for that speech. It's not difficult to speak. It is extremely difficult to speak on a subject. It's extremely topical, but it's also a subject, as she said, where we suffer an information overload. So to talk on that and keep us engrossed for almost 45 minutes to an hour was remarkable. Thank you, ma'am, for that excellent speech. Ram mentioned it, and it's a question that is playing on most of our minds, and a question very relevant, I suppose, to the those of you who are coming in today and entering this field of journalism. The question is, of course, is journalism in crisis? Of course it is. There's public distrust of journalism and journalists. There are all kinds of pressures on media owners, and that's often passed on to journalists. And the owners themselves are facing a severe financial squeeze, which existed before the pandemic. It's been made worse by the pandemic. But then, when was journalism ever an easy game? I'm going to quote from a report on a commission that was formed to see how journalism could be reinvented in the United States. Commission members, and I'm quoting, are worried about the forces of division in American society, the power of tribalism to warp political debate, and the press's role in provoking discord. Americans, it seemed, were inhabiting different worlds of fact and judgment. Now, this could very well be referring to the situation today, but it was written almost 75 years ago in 1943, and the commission it refers to is the Hutchins Commission, which was set up by Robert Luce, the founder of Time magazine. Now, I'm not underplaying the problems that journalism faces today, but just reminding ourselves that good journalism has always been difficult. But there's hope, and there's lots of hope, and it's something that Ram spoke about, something that Dr. Swaminathan spoke about. I see big hope in technology. Well, certainly, technology is helping create monopolies. Think Facebook, think Google, but these monopolies will hopefully be regulated better using technology. But more important for us is that technology is also enabling the smaller disruptor. Let's look at the awards today. 2 winners and 2 special mentions. 4 examples of what the jury found was outstanding journalism. 3 of these 4 reports were published on digital brands, named in platforms that didn't even exist a few years ago. Some of our finest journalism is now being produced at these places. These are produced by and run by passionate journalists. They referred to earlier also by Dr. Swaminathan. Online journalism is really setting the trend. These journalists are aware of our history, and yet they don't carry its baggage. They are my second big hope. So this combination of technology and passion is heartening and certainly speaks of a future. What struck us jurors was the extremely high, uniformly high quality of all the reports that we were asked to judge. And here we must thank the shortlist jury for whittling down 252 entries into 2 categories of 10 each. It certainly made our task easier, if not as exciting. What also impressed us, the jury, was, and I quote a phrase from Walter Lippmann, scrupulous evidence-based reporting. All these pieces were reporting based on facts. The facts were presented truthfully, and more importantly, in these times of information overload and warping of perspectives, these facts were placed in context. It was uniform across all the pieces that we had to judge. A lot of the reports were on issues that get lost in what Jarshad earlier called the daily drumbeat of breaking news. So they gave us a very representative picture of India that we often don't see. It wasn't easy choosing just one winner in each category, but we had a delightfully enriching time doing so. So therefore, now I'm thrilled and honored to announce the list of outstanding entries and the winners. I shall begin with the special mentions. The special mention in the first category, the older category that we are going to talk about, and this is in investigative journalism. The first special mention is Jeff Joseph Paul Caricini, and this is for his report on Kerala's contentious quarries. It is published in the Lead. Jeff, congratulations. I think it was a 6-part report. You gave us a lot of work, but it was excellent reporting. The second mention is Rohini Mohan. She is an alumnus apparently of ACJ. We didn't know it when we were judging these awards. Hers came out in scroll.in, and it's about worse than a death sentence inside Assam's sham trials that could strip millions of citizenship. Congratulations, Rohini. Again, an excellent piece, which really, it's sad that we just had to choose one winner. So I'm going to come to the final, the winner of the ACJ Award for Investigative Journalism 2019. And that winner is Nitin Sethi. And he gets it for his 6-part series on electoral bonds. Nitin Sethi for his 6-part series on electoral bonds published in HuffPost India. Nitin, congratulations. We're going to hear from you later, and we're going to hear more about this piece in this very program in just a little while. Nitin, congratulations. I'm not going to say too much on this because Vidya is going to talk a lot about what impressed us about this piece that won this award. And now for an award that's Jarshad introduced so emotionally, and it's the KP Narayanan Kumar Memorial Award for Social Impact Journalism. This is the first time that we are giving this award, and this goes to an extremely deserving winner. And I'm sure this is a story that KP would have approved of as well. Shiv Sahe Singh for his report, Death by Digital Exclusion, on the faulty public distribution system in Jharkhand. It was published in the Hindu. Shiv Sahe Singh, congratulations. Nikhil, back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Senthil. We really appreciate the work that's been done by the jury. I'd now like to request our keynote speaker and chief guest for today's program, Dr. Swaminathan, to kindly present the awards to the winners. Ma'am, if you could just please say a few words and confer these awards, we'd be very grateful.
Thank you. Yes, it's difficult to know how exactly to present the awards, but perhaps I'd just like to say that what I've heard from the jury about the people who applied, who were shortlisted and then who were ultimately selected, and the winners that we see in front of us seem to have all be amazing journalists, very young, and all written on topics which are extremely relevant and also all on the, mostly, I think, on the digital media. So I'd like to wish them all the best, congratulate them for winning these awards, particularly Shiv Sahay Singh, who wins the first KP Narayanan Kumar Memorial Award, as well as the winner and the special mentions of the investigative award of the ACJ. Hearty congratulations, and wish you very successful careers in the future.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that. We really appreciate it. I'd now like to invite jury member Ms. Vidya Subramaniam to please read the citation for the Investigative Journalism Award.
Okay.
Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Nikhil. Before I read the citation, the jury had absolutely no difficulty in deciding that this was in fact going to be the winner. Even though we had excellent entries, and at one point we did wonder, which one to choose, but only for public interest, this had to outshine everything else. I mean, the public interest here is so overwhelming that it simply cannot be overlooked. So I would like to congratulate Nitin Sethi. He's a former, we worked together at one point. I know him as a very hardworking, very brave, very courageous journalist. And so congratulations to him. And here I'll read the citation. This year, the jury had several outstanding entries to choose from. However, the final entry selected itself for its stunning exposure of how easily an elected government can subvert the checks and balances fundamental to a parliamentary democracy. Nitin Sethi's 6-part investigative series on the electoral bonds is an expose in the classic sense. It combines elements of investigation and documentation with paramount public interest. Indeed, the story unearths and establishes facts about the electoral bond scheme that, although previously suspected, remained in the realm of speculation for want of hard evidence. SETI's documentation brings out staggering details about how the government pushed through the bond in the face of stiff opposition from the Reserve Bank of India and the Election Commission of India, and thereafter went on to expand the scope of the scheme by breaking the rules notified in this regard. In 2018, the central government introduced the electoral bond scheme as an innovative and far-reaching measure to curb the use of black money in election funding. However, a key feature of the scheme was the anonymity it provided donors, and which rendered it opaque and vulnerable to misuse. The RBI was concerned that the bonds would become bearer instrument that could undermine faith in the banknotes issued by the central bank, while the ECI flagged the opacity of the scheme and the opportunity it afforded to shell companies to funnel funds to political parties. SETI's documentation shows that while the RBI suggested limiting the scope of the bond, the government instead opened more windows to enable purchase of the bond in close proximity to state elections. Elections are the bedrock of a parliamentary democracy, and when the electoral arena is thought to be manipulated and made opaque, it can impinge on democracy itself. It is in this sense that SETI's investigation becomes a public service. Mention must be made here of the extensive use of the Right to Information Act and the stellar role played by Commodore Lokesh Batra in procuring many of the documents. Thank you so much. And all the best to Nitin Sethi, and congratulations once again. Over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you, Vidya. I now invite jury member Jos Martin Tarakan to please read the citation of the Social Impact Award. Over to you, Jos.
Thank you, Nikhil. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank the Asian College of Journalism and my fellow classmates from the 2001 batch of ACJ and KP Narayanan Kumar's family for making this possible. The KP Narayanan Kumar Memorial Award for Social Impact Journalism was instituted to recognize reportage that identifies latent social problems, gives a voice to those affected, and points to potential remedies. The unanimous pick for the inaugural award is Shiv Sahai Singh's Death by Digital Exclusion on Public Distribution in Jharkhand, published in the Hindu. The article stood above the rest for its focus on how ostensible reforms to a government scheme can often adversely impact those who need it the most due to flaws in design and implementation. Digitization and Aadhaar verification of potential beneficiaries were meant to plug leakages in the public distribution system. However, Singh's on-the-ground reporting shows that in tribal villages of Jharkhand, the system has created more problems than it has solved. For example, those who have not been able to meet the criteria of having a ration card and a linked Aadhaar number have been excluded from the receiving food grain. Lack of internet connectivity in remote villages means that point-of-sale machines used for tracking deliveries do not work. The report points out that fixing connectivity alone may not be the solution. The cancellation of ration cards held by those who really required them indicates a need to rethink a digitization at all costs approach. Singh's article highlights a series of deaths that are seen as a consequence of a patchy PDS, accentuated by the poor implementation of the other major rural safety net in India, the Job Guarantee Scheme. The state government denies these deaths are caused by starvation. The scale of the challenge is covered by Sahai's interviews with people who have been pushed to a precarious existence by policy experiments that on paper are meant to safeguard their entitlements. The potential benefits of digital transformation have been well advertised by the Narendra Modi government. Many have adapted to the disruptions such a transformation entails. Sahai's report is a timely reminder that for those on the margin, these disruptions may be the last straw. Thank you. Congratulations, Shiv Sahai Singh. And now over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you so much for that, Jos. and congratulations to the winners. I would now like to invite of the first award, the Investigative Journalism Award, Mr. Nitin Sethi, to please share his response, with us. So Nitin, if you're on here, please do come and share your thoughts. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for the award. It's an honor and a privilege to be bestowed with the most prestigious journalism award in India, I feel. I accept this award as a partner in crime with Commodore Lokesh Batra, who secured the documents through RTI. I accept this award also knowing that the series on electoral bonds kickstarted a new experiment where publications across languages work together to bring out evidence-based journalism, to renew journalism which is not afraid to fearlessly scrutinize those in power. We now call it the Reporters Collective. It takes a village to bring up a child, or I think also to produce a good story. I've been fortunate. I've had several villages backing me while we worked on this electoral bond story. The first and foremost, obviously, my family, Akoijam, Sunita, and Zoya. But I also had a village of encouraging editors and journalists across languages and publications who made the series possible, working formally and informally with me. First and foremost, the brilliant editors at Huffington Post India who led this series, and then the entire teams at News Laundry, Arimukham, Prajavani, Deccan Herald, Savuku, Dharitri, Imphal Free Press, Arunachal Times. I want to make a special mention of one person who dreamt it along with me and made it possible, Mr. Krishna Prasad, who has never met me, but yet helped me make this go through. I'd like to thank the three families I have in Pasighat, Arunachal, in Imphal, and in Hyderabad, and another village of friends who become my safety net when those who were supposed to protect us as journalists did not. Anyone who gets an award, I think, very often believes he's suddenly acquired wisdom to share with the others. If you indulge me, I'll try and do the same for the next 30 seconds, particularly for the young students who join the course this year and will in the next year come out. While I think there is cynicism, as Senthil was talking about, that generally prevails in the profession, I think a healthy skepticism is more essential. I do believe this is, in some sense, the golden period for journalism to renew its public purpose and its public intent, which we've lost in the last few years. I also see great value in the fact that if some old decaying legacy structures of journalism fall apart, it perhaps provides all of you great opportunities to become the green shoots that renew faith in journalism. I would urge and plead with you that when you step out to do your journalism, go beyond writing the stories of the victims of malgovernance, write stories that question those in power. That's the first calling of journalism, and I wish you all good luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nitin. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your thoughts, and many congratulations to you again. I would now like to call upon Mr. Shiv Sahai Singh, the winner of the inaugural KP Narayanan Kumar Memorial Award for Social Impact Journalism, to please come and share your thoughts. So over to you, Shiv. Shiv, are you with us?
Shiv, if you're there, you have to unmute your mic.
I believe he's with us, so we're just going to give him a moment to just figure out the tech and share his thoughts. So please bear with us.
Unless he's not unmuted his mic.
Shiv, I'm not sure if you're able to hear us, but please unmute your mic. And I believe he is on the call, sir. So I'm just waiting to see if he can.
I think you can call him on the phone. Where somebody can call him on the phone and quickly see if he's.
Unless he's having connectivity issues.
Are you trying him on the phone, Nikhil?
Yes, I'm just trying to call him. Shiv, we're trying to hear from you on the Zoom call. Right. Yeah. No. Shiv, are you able to join the call? You're having connectivity issues. Okay.
You can put it on.
He says he's
You can put it on.
Unfortunately having connectivity.
You can put it on speaker and let him speak on the phone.
Okay, so I'll try that. Yeah, Shiv, you can speak now. We're going to try this.
So I'm sorry that I was trying to connect. I could hear everything, but somehow the video doesn't work. So I would like to thank the ACJ. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I would like to thank ACJ and jury for the awards, and also to the editors at the Hindu who allowed me to work on the story. Just a couple of things about the story. There are reports of PDS benefits being denied because of this Aadhaar linkages in Jharkhand. When we started working on it, what we found was that in case even deaths were reported, there was no follow-up of the government or any agency. In the same neighborhood where deaths have been, that people were still being denied the PDS benefits for Aadhaar and ration cards not being linked, and it was not a problem that was only with the PDS beneficiaries. Even the ration providers had a lot of new technologies in adapting to the new technologies. They had to another blog or another city to upload the data. Hello. Yeah. So what was very interesting in the whole story was that a system was thrust upon people, and they didn't know how to what to do with it. Another thing I also want to highlight is that after the story got published, we got a number of emails and a number of response on people, readers, social activists who wanted to help these families or these people who were mentioned in the story. They wanted to make some contribution or something.
Shiv, looks like your video is on. So I'm going to turn this off and let you to continue to speak on the Zoom link. Please go ahead.
Hello?
We can see you on the Zoom.
Hello.
Shiv, go ahead. We can hear you on the Zoom link.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Should I speak on Zoom? Hello.
Yes, we're able to see and hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So what I was saying that after the story got published, we got a number of emails, and a number of people wanted to contribute and help these people who were mentioned in the story. But I would like to tell students that this was a governance issue which we wanted to highlight. So the idea was that a system
had been very wrong in its implementation, and crores of people were suffering because of that faulty implementation and the insistence of linking Aadhaar with ration cards so that everybody gets the benefit, right? So this is what I wanted to say, and this is what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Shiv. We're really grateful for you to be here as well, and many congratulations on being the inaugural award winner. We'll now invite a very special guest who is part of this program. This is KP Lakshmi and KP Parvati, both of whom are representing the family of KP Narayanan Kumar. So they're his sisters. So Lakshmi and Parvati, if you're here, please do take over and please share your thoughts with us on this important occasion. Hi, Lakshmi.
Hello. Thank you, Nikhil. I'm speaking on behalf of my family. Life is eternal. From that perspective, physical death paves way for greater heights for the soul to transcend. So I believe my brother lives on. The most striking character of him was his ease and charm with anyone and everyone, whether it's a general or an entire community of fishermen. And this came from his very unclouded sincerity. And if I have to talk about his life journey, for me, it was a jam-packed, intense moments filled with so much of experience from all quarters, so much of observation, learning, imbibing, and questioning, and truly a 24/7 reporter. From the chubby-cheeked little brother who was fascinated by Sherlock Holmes to a legendary figure inspiring many, he surely and truly has walked a path of courage and brotherhood, and truly has become victorious. In shaping his sensibilities, I, on behalf of our family, take this opportunity to show our deep gratitude to his mentors and ACJ as an institution. And no words to say for the love and remembrance shown by his very dear friends who have been with us throughout and made this award possible. To Shiv Sahai Singh, Nitin Sethi, the award winners, and all the participant entries for the award, and the whole community of journalists, our very, very best wishes for you all to carry the torchlight forward in very challenging times. All the very, very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi, for that wonderful message. We really appreciate you being here with us today. And now, for a very important part of the program, I'd like to invite Dhanya Skaryachan, faculty member from the ACJ Bloomberg program, to kindly propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Dhanya.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. On behalf of the Asian College of Journalism, I would like to thank our chief guest, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, for taking out the time in the middle of a pandemic to deliver the commencement lecture for the class of 2021. Thank you for your insightful speech today and all your larger efforts to fight COVID-19. Thank you for also agreeing to present our prestigious awards for investigative and social impact journalism. I would now like to thank the final jury comprising Senthil Chengal Varayan, Vidya Subramaniam, and Jose Martin Tharakan for doing a fantastic job of evaluating the award entries for this year. We couldn't have done it without you. I would also like to use this chance to congratulate Nitin Sethi and Shiv Sahai Singh, the winners of this year's awards, and extend my heartfelt gratitude to them for showing the courage to pursue difficult stories despite the pressure from the powers that be. A big word of thanks to the first batch of ACJ for coming together and instituting a new award to honor the memory of your dear friend and classmate, KP Narayanan Award, a gifted journalist and extraordinary storyteller. I would also like to thank all the trustees of the Media Development Foundation, including Shashi Kumar and N. Ram, for instituting the Investigative Journalism Award half a decade back to inspire more journalists to unearth wrongdoing and hold the powerful to account. I would also like to use this chance to thank all the media houses and independent journalists for submitting your best work in time and boosting the profile of our annual awards. A huge word of thanks to KP Lakshmi and Parvati for inspiring the class of 2021 by sharing your brother's story. Last but not the least, I'd also like to thank our awards convener, Nikhil Kanikal, and all the faculty members who served on the shortlist jury for your hard work. Thank you, the class of 2021, for being such a great audience. Once again, thanks and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. That brings this ceremony, this commencement event to a close. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and to a vibrant and, shall we say, purposive year ahead. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.